The grandfather clock in my study chimed midnight as I reviewed the email for the 5th time. My daughter Victoria had sent it 3 hours ago, and each reading only deepened my disbelief. Dad, I've decided that Aunt Margaret should have the Edinburgh estate. She needs it more than you do, and I've already discussed the arrangements with her. The lawyers will contact you tomorrow about transferring the deed. It's for the best, you're barely there anyway. I closed my laptop and reached for the whiskey I'd poured earlier. At 58, after decades building my academic career and reputation as one of Britain's foremost medieval historians, I never expected to be blindsided by my own daughter. The Edinburgh estate had been my sanctuary for 15 years. I'd purchased it after my biography of Mary, Queen of Scots, had unexpectedly topped the bestseller lists. Every stone, every beam, every rose in the garden represented something I'd earned through my own efforts. And now Victoria, my only child, had unilaterally decided to give it away to my late wife's sister. I should have seen this coming. Since Charlotte's death 2 years ago, Victoria had changed. The warm, thoughtful young woman who once called me every Sunday had gradually transformed into someone calculating and distant. But this level of entitlement, assuming she could simply redistribute my property, shocked even me. My phone buzzed. Victoria again. Did you get my email? Aunt Margaret is so excited. This is really the right thing to do. I set the phone down without responding. Tomorrow would be soon enough for confrontation. Tonight, I needed to think. Professor James Alexander. I looked up from my notes to find a student hovering in my office doorway, nervously clutching a dog-eared copy of my Tudor England textbook. Yes, come in, I said, grateful for the distraction. After a sleepless night contemplating Victoria's betrayal, I'd come to the university early, hoping familiar routines might clear my head. After guiding the young man through his thesis questions, I found myself staring at the family photo on my desk. Victoria at her university graduation, Charlotte and I flanking her with proud smiles. That had been before Charlotte's cancer diagnosis, before the treatments that failed, before Victoria had moved to London with her investment banker husband, Philip. My phone rang, displaying Victoria's number. I answered, bracing myself. Dad, did you get my email? Did you speak to the lawyers? Victoria, I kept my voice steady. You cannot give away property that isn't yours. Don't be difficult, she sighed. Aunt Margaret needs a proper home. Her flat is tiny, and after everything she did for us when Mom was sick, I appreciate Margaret's help, I interrupted, but that doesn't entitle her to my house. Your house? Victoria's voice sharpened. The house you visit 3 weekends a year. Meanwhile, Aunt Margaret is struggling to make rent. Then perhaps you could help her, or invite her to live with you and Philip in your London townhouse. The silence told me I'd scored a point. That's not possible, and you know it, Victoria finally replied. Philip's mother is already staying with us. Ah, so it's fine to give away my property, but not to inconvenience yourselves. You're being selfish, Victoria's voice rose. Mom would be so disappointed in you. That was a low blow, and we both knew it. Charlotte had been generous to a fault, but she'd never have expected me to surrender my home. I'm hanging up now, I said quietly. Do not contact any lawyers about my property. I ended the call before she could respond, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. For a moment, I considered calling Charlotte's sister directly, wondering if she was truly behind this scheme or merely an opportunistic beneficiary. But no, this situation required careful thought, not emotional reactions. Victoria had shown her hand. Now I needed to plan my response. 3 days passed without communication from Victoria. I taught my classes, held office hours, and tried to focus on the manuscript I was supposed to be editing. But my mind kept returning to the Edinburgh estate and my daughter's betrayal. On the 4th day, as autumn rain lashed against my office windows, my phone rang again. Not Victoria this time, but a number I didn't recognize. Professor Alexander. This is Howard Blackwell from Blackwell and Associates. I'm calling regarding the transfer of your Edinburgh property. So Victoria had gone ahead despite my explicit refusal. A cold anger settled in my chest. There will be no transfer, Mr. Blackwell. The property is mine, and I have not authorized any changes. I see. The lawyer sounded uncomfortable. That's not what I was told, Mrs. Edwards. Your daughter indicated you had agreed to sign over the deed to a Margaret Winters. Mrs. Edwards was mistaken, I said, my voice ice. And I would suggest that in the future, you confirm such matters directly with the property owner before proceeding. After ending the call, I sat motionless, contemplating what Victoria's actions revealed. She hadn't simply made a suggestion, she'd actively tried to circumvent my authority. This went beyond presumption into something more disturbing. That evening, I called my own solicitor, Andrew Paxton, who had handled my affairs for 20 years. "They can't force a transfer without your signature," Andrew reassured me after I explained the situation. "But it's troubling that they proceeded this far. Would you like me to send a formal cease and desist?" "Not yet," I said, an idea beginning to form. "I'd like to consider my options first." "James," Andrew's voice softened, "is everything all right between you and Victoria?" "This is unusual behavior. Apparently, I don't know my daughter as well as I thought," I replied. "But I intend to find out exactly what's happening. Can you come to my office tomorrow? I may need your help with something." The next morning, Andrew and I sat across from each other in my university office, mugs of tea growing cold as I outlined my suspicions. "Victoria has never shown interest in the Edinburgh estate before," I explained. "She visited perhaps 3 times in 15 years, always complaining about the isolation. And Margaret, while Charlotte's sister, has never been particularly close to our family." "So why the sudden interest?" Andrew asked, making notes. "That's what I need to find out. And I'd also like to protect the property from any future attempts." By the time Andrew left, we had a plan. I would appear to soften my position and invite Victoria and Philip to the estate for the weekend, ostensibly to discuss options. Meanwhile, Andrew would prepare documents that would make any unauthorized transfer impossible. Victoria sounded surprised but pleased when I called to extend the invitation. "We can come this Saturday," she said. "I'll tell Aunt Margaret to join us." "No," I replied firmly. "Just you and Philip first. Let's talk as a family before involving others." She hesitated, then agreed. As I packed for the trip to Edinburgh, I considered what had motivated Victoria's behavior. Was it simple greed, a misguided sense of family obligation, or something else entirely? By Sunday, I intended to have answers. The Edinburgh estate sat on 3 acres of rolling countryside, its stone walls weathered by centuries of Scottish winters. As I arrived Friday evening to prepare for Victoria and Philip's visit, I felt the familiar sense of peace that had drawn me to the property initially. Inside, I moved through the rooms, ensuring everything was ready. The house wasn't ostentatious: 4 bedrooms, a library, a spacious kitchen, and the solarium Charlotte had loved, where morning light streamed through east-facing windows. But it was solid, historic, and unquestionably mine. Saturday dawned clear and cool. I spent the morning in the library, reviewing the documents Andrew had prepared and contemplating my approach. When the crunch of tires on gravel announced Victoria and Philip's arrival, I was ready. "Dad," Victoria kissed my cheek with practiced warmth. "The place looks wonderful." Philip shook my hand, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Professor, thanks for having us." I led them to the sitting room, where I'd arranged tea. Victoria immediately launched into a carefully rehearsed speech about Aunt Margaret's difficulties, the practicality of her living in Edinburgh, and how everyone would benefit from this arrangement. I listened without interrupting, noting how Philip's gaze kept drifting to the antique furnishings, mentally cataloging their value. When Victoria finally paused, I spoke. "I understand Margaret is struggling. I'm happy to help her find suitable accommodation, perhaps even provide a housing allowance. But this estate is not available." Victoria's smile faltered. "Dad, be reasonable. You're alone in London most of the time. This place is wasted on occasional weekends." "It's mine to waste," I said simply. Philip leaned forward. "Sir, with all due respect, Victoria is thinking of your future too. Maintaining this property must be expensive." "At your age, at my age," I interrupted, "I still have decades of life ahead and every intention of enjoying this home I worked for." Victoria's facade cracked. "This is ridiculous. Aunt Margaret needs what Margaret needs, and what you've promised her are 2 different matters," I cut in. "Why are you really doing this, Victoria? And please don't insult my intelligence with more talk about family obligation." The silence stretched between us. Finally, Philip cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should be direct," he said, glancing at Victoria. "There's an opportunity to develop this land. The location has become quite valuable." And there it was. Not family concern, but profit. "Develop," I repeated. "You mean sell to developers?" Victoria had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Only a portion. Margaret would keep the main house. The rest, well, the profit would help everyone, including you and Philip. We would manage the project," Philip admitted, "for a standard fee." The pieces clicked into place. Victoria hadn't simply decided to give away my property. She and Philip had concocted a scheme to profit from it, using Margaret as a sympathetic front. I see, I said, keeping my voice level. And when did you plan to discuss this development opportunity with me? Victoria waved dismissively. You're not interested in business matters. We thought it would be simpler this way. Simpler to transfer my property without my knowledge. To make promises to Margaret, hire lawyers, and attempt to circumvent my ownership. Dad, Victoria began. I think, I said, standing, that we should take some time to consider our positions. Your rooms are prepared upstairs. Dinner will be at 7. I left them exchanging worried glances and retreated to my study, where I placed a call to Andrew. They want to develop the land, I explained. Margaret is just a cover story. That explains the urgency, Andrew replied. Do you want me to proceed with the trust arrangement we discussed? Yes, I said, and add one more detail. I want to know exactly what happens to property placed in this trust if I die. Andrew's response confirmed my suspicions. If the estate went into the trust I was establishing, Victoria would have no control over it, even after my death. The land would be preserved intact, managed by trustees according to my explicit instructions. As I hung up, I considered my next move. Simply protecting the property wasn't enough. Victoria and Philip had revealed something fundamental about their character and their view of me. They saw an aging academic, easily manipulated, his possessions already mentally divided among more deserving recipients. They needed to understand how profoundly they had misjudged me. Dinner was a tense affair. Victoria attempted small talk while Philip drank more wine than was prudent. I maintained polite detachment, neither confrontational nor conciliatory. I've been thinking about your proposal, I said as we finished dessert. Perhaps we should visit the sections of the property you're considering for development. Tomorrow morning. Victoria brightened, exchanging a hopeful glance with Philip. That would be wonderful, Dad. Excellent. And I have some documents for us to review afterward. Legal matters that might simplify things. Philip leaned forward eagerly. We brought paperwork as well. Preliminary proposals. Perfect, I smiled. We'll have a productive morning. Later, alone in my study, I made final preparations for the next day. Victoria and Philip believed they were close to achieving their goal. By tomorrow afternoon, they would understand exactly how wrong they were. I slept soundly for the first time in days. Morning brought light rain, the kind of soft Scottish mist that beads on stone walls and soaks through clothing. Perfect for my purposes. I led Victoria and Philip across the grounds, pointing out boundaries and landmarks, letting them believe I was considering their plans. Philip grew increasingly enthusiastic, describing luxury homes and exclusive amenities. Victoria watched me carefully, perhaps sensing something beneath my cooperative demeanor. This area here, Philip indicated a sloping field, would be perfect for the first phase. 6 homes, all with views. Interesting, I nodded. Let's head back to the house and look at those documents. In the library, I poured coffee while Victoria and Philip spread their development proposals across the antique table. Glossy renderings showed modern homes where ancient trees currently stood. Before we get too deep into this, I said, I have something for you to review. I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a copy of the trust document Andrew had prepared, along with a detailed letter explaining exactly what I had discovered and what actions I had taken. Victoria frowned as she began reading. Beside her, Philip's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. What is this? Victoria looked up, her voice sharp. That, I said calmly, is documentation of the irrevocable trust I established yesterday. The Edinburgh estate, in its entirety, now belongs to the Historical Preservation Trust of Scotland. I retain lifetime usage rights, but the property can never be sold or developed. Not by me, not by you, not by anyone. Philip snatched the papers, scanning them frantically. This can't be legal. I assure you it is, I replied. My solicitor was quite thorough. Victoria's face flushed with anger. You had no right. I had every right. It was my property, purchased with my money, maintained with my resources. What I didn't have was any obligation to inform you before protecting it from your schemes. We were trying to help, Victoria protested. No, I said quietly. You were trying to profit from something that wasn't yours to sell. You lied to me, to Margaret, and probably to yourselves about your motivations. Philip stood abruptly. This is outrageous. We could challenge this. You could try, I acknowledged. But the trust is solid, and contesting it would only reveal your plans to the world. How would your banking colleagues react to learning you attempted to manipulate your father-in-law out of his property, Philip? He paled slightly, the implications clear. Victoria's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before or perhaps had never allowed myself to see. You've always been selfish. Always putting your precious career and your precious possessions above family. Is that how you justify this? I asked. By recasting me as the villain. Mom would be ashamed of you, she spat. No, I said, the certainty in my voice stopping her. Charlotte would be heartbroken by what you've become. She raised you to be better than this. Victoria stood, hands trembling. We're leaving. Don't expect to hear from us again. That's your choice, I replied. But know this, I would have helped Margaret willingly if asked honestly. I would have considered reasonable proposals for this property if approached respectfully. What I will never do is reward deception and entitlement. They left within the hour, Philip silent and seething, Victoria refusing to meet my eyes as they drove away. I watched from the library window, feeling not triumph but a profound sadness. In protecting my property, I had lost my daughter or perhaps merely recognized a loss that had occurred long ago. That evening, I called Margaret directly. James, she sounded surprised. Victoria said you refused to help. That's not accurate, I explained gently. Victoria and Philip approached this dishonestly. But I'd like to help you find suitable housing, Margaret. Charlotte would want that. Her confusion was genuine. They told me you were giving me the Edinburgh house. I never asked for that, it seemed excessive. They had other plans for most of the property, I explained. You were to be the public face of their development scheme. Margaret's shock and subsequent anger confirmed my suspicions. She had been manipulated as thoroughly as I was meant to be. I'm so sorry, James, she said finally. I had no idea. It's not your fault, I assured her. And my offer stands. Let me help you find a proper place to live. 2 weeks later, I helped Margaret move into a comfortable cottage in a village not far from Edinburgh. The purchase, arranged through Andrew, included a maintenance fund that would ensure Margaret never struggled with housing costs again. It was what Charlotte would have wanted, and what I was happy to provide when asked directly. The Edinburgh estate remained in trust, its grounds and historic features protected in perpetuity. I continued to use it as my refuge, perhaps more frequently now that the university semester had ended. Victoria and Philip did not contact me again, though I occasionally heard news through mutual acquaintances. Their development company struggled after losing a major investor. Their London lifestyle remained lavish, funded increasingly by debt rather than income. Sometimes, on quiet evenings in the Edinburgh Library, I would look at old family photographs and wonder where I had gone wrong in raising Victoria. Had I been too generous, too absorbed in my work, or had other influences shaped her into someone who viewed relationships as transactions and family obligations as one-directional? I never reached a satisfying conclusion, but I did find peace in knowing I had acted with integrity, preserved something valuable, and perhaps even taught a final, difficult lesson about consequences and character. If Victoria ever chose to learn from it, my door would remain open. If not, I had protected my legacy in the most meaningful way possible, not just the physical estate, but the principles it represented: hard work, honest dealings, and the understanding that true inheritance includes values, not just valuables. The rain still falls on the Edinburgh estate. The roses Charlotte planted still bloom each spring, and I still hope that someday Victoria might return, not for what she can take, but for what she might finally understand. Until then, I keep her photograph on my desk and her memory in my heart, while protecting the boundaries she never learned to respect.